vocabulary all over the place, and it's nice for me to finally get on board and know what everybody's talking about.
Yeah, it's a little bit foreign when you hear people talking, oh, he's a controller, and somehow that means something.
Yeah. Right.
And have you been able to jump into the fray with your newly found language?
I sure have.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually quite a common topic of conversation, and it's nice for me to be able to wade in now and know what the heck's going on.
Well, that's great. How it's interesting. Travis and I have been partners for a while, but I don't do any of the Collier's work typically. So I'm curious, how does it, in the regular environment, how is it used?
Well, we discuss, someone on the team might do something, and we'll attribute that to a characteristic of one of these styles.
Mm-hmm.
That happens quite a bit.
And then with that information, there's a course of action that can result. Is that the general use?
That is correct. People actually are aware of it, not only self-aware but of others, and tend to talk about it and adapt and look for strengths and weaknesses.
That's great. That's great. The whole game. I know Travis has really layered this on, but the whole game is getting wired prosperity, and one of the ways that we just habitually suffer as humans is we keep expecting people to not act like who they are. And when we can actually anticipate that they're going to behave in those ways, we can stop being surprised and stop suffering and start to build prosperity as a result. So that's awesome, James. I'm really glad to hear that you're able to use it and start to really get value out of it.
Yes.
Lauren and Sean are here.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Lauren and Sean.
Lauren and Sean. Excellent. Lauren and Sean. And are you in the same location?
We are.
We are.
Okay. Would that be Scottsdale at Phoenix, or is that the same?
Yeah, we're both in Phoenix.
We're in Phoenix.
Okay, Phoenix. Great. Excellent. Well, welcome.
Diana Udoina.
McMahon is here from Detroit.
Okay, let's see. What's going down? Can you say that sorry, who was from Detroit?
Kim.
Diana Udoina.
I have Kim on my list. Kim, Detroit. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's see. I've got Kim, I've got Lauren, I've got Sean, James, and Renee. Who did I miss?
Sonia's on from San Francisco.
Okay, Sonia.
Julie from Albuquerque.
All right, Julie, Albuquerque.
Tammy Scott in Atlanta.
Wow, Tammy from Atlanta. Great. Is there a Paul or a Diana or a Tamara or a Brenda? All right. Well, let's get started, and as people jump in, that's fine. We'll engage. So my name is Tony Cooper. I am Travis's business partner. We've worked together for quite a while, and I know he loves to run all the webinars, and I think as you got a message, he's busy working with a bunch of MDs in Toronto today. So I'm happy to come in and work with you all. You'll have to give me a little bit of support. I'm usually a face-to-face person, so me working with all these people remotely is a little bit disturbing. So you'll have to be personable for me. So thanks so much for being here, for completing your homework. We're going to review that today. This is just an orientation, the introduction to market force principles. This is session number 5. So you've got one more to go after this. And what we're going to do today is everybody have this up on the screen? Can they see? Other than James?
Yep.
Anybody have any trouble with the presentation, or is it in front of everyone?
Tammy is still trying to get to the presentation. I'm sorry.
Okay, you know what? I had a lot of trouble this morning. I literally took me 35 minutes to get in. So that's why I was in particular asking if anybody's having any troubles. Well, given that James is not going to be on the presentation anyway, I'll do my best to let everybody know what's happening on the screen as it's relevant. So is it all right if I just jump in and get started?
Go for it.
Okay, excellent. So what we're going to cover today is essentially a review of what you've done so far. We're going to look at the homework and address any questions you have with it. Provide some feedback. So one of the things you provide in your homework was who are the easiest and hardest styles for you to get along with. We can provide some people, some feedback on that. Also, famous people and what you think their styles might be. And what's really helpful about that part is it's just practice. It's just practice making some initial deductions. It's not about being right. Again, market force is not about putting people into a box. It's just acknowledging that your biology puts you into a box, and so the more we can not act like our style when appropriate for prosperity we create. So at this time, we're just going to start recognizing some of the habits. And then once we really get into the meat today, we're going to look at the inner relationships between the styles, and that's usually a pretty fun start. So let's jump in and do a review. So market force, as you're learning, is a business execution system. Essentially, it's a set of tools designed to help you execute better in business, in particular when working with other people. We can't, unfortunately, give you any more time in the day, but we can make you more efficient and effective. So the first tool that Travis spent time with you on is this concept of language. And language is, while it seems very simple, it's not a trivial concept, is that there really only are two types of languages that we humans use. There's the first one, which is we call judgmental language, but it's language for no action. And then there's the performative language, which is language for action. So all we ask in this is that you just get clear on the difference between the two. No action, language for no action, produces exactly that. It only produces people to agree with you or disagree with you or essentially not be interested in what you have to say. And performative language is the only language that actually creates action. And so all we ask is that you get clear on which you're using, which you want to use when, and how much time you're spending on each. And from our perspective, when you're not playing on the field of business, we want you to feel free to use as much language for inaction as possible. It's a very big part of being human. It's when we talk sports, when we talk about the Final Four, and I don't know if anybody's watching that, spend a lot of time talking about the teams and what you saw and what was exciting, and at the end of the day, nothing's going to be different in the world as a result, but it's entertaining, and that's what we do. But when we're playing on the field of business, what we really recommend is you seek to spend as much time as possible in language for action, and it's primarily just to get things moving. Any questions on that or any usage of that? Have you noticed any of this in your environment? No? Okay. So one of the things that you'll notice once you do start moving, as you realize life is just simply a series of breakdowns, which brings us to this tool, either the balance model or the breakdown recovery tool. And that life simply shows up as a series of breakdowns. Breakdown, solution, breakdown, solution, breakdown, solution, and you continue on that path until you die. And that's life. And so the people that continue to be prosperous are the ones who know how to manage this really, really well. And so the only way to avoid breakdowns, according to this framework, is to not have intentions. To lose your ambition, because every time you create an intention of something you want to do in the world, a breakdown is the result of that. So if there's anybody on the phone that's happy to have no more ambition, you feel free to get off the call and you'll avoid breakdowns for the rest of your life. My assumption is that you're all wanting to stay in your place of ambition and continue to grow. And so the key from this tool, this is the arrow that turns into the explosion, and there's an upward-facing arrow that goes to team and a downward-facing arrow that goes to gang, is that in the event of a breakdown, don't focus on the breakdown. Bring your focus back to the attention, or your attention of the intention, and that automatically throws you on the upward-facing arrow. So given what I intend, what's the next most powerful thing to do? Now, when people tend to focus on the breakdown itself, another way of saying that is having a breakdown about the breakdown, that actually throws you on the downward-facing arrow, where you get to experience the adrenaline rush of emotional upset. Then you get to cast a bunch of judgments on the people around you, and then you finally get to bask in the glow of your habitual survival responses. And it all feels really, really good, but in the end of the day, it gets you further and further away from what you're trying to achieve. So this is one of those things that you tend to see regularly in business. And so any comments or questions on the balance model or the breakdown recovery model?
Nope.
No. Got it.
No? Okay. Great. James, you keeping up with this? I know it's hard not seeing the screen.
I'm doing fine, no problem.
Okay, great. So speaking of habitual behavior, really the whole context about all this breakdown stuff is pressure. Styles is really just about pressure, what happens to people when they're under pressure. And so when pressure is introduced into your life, either actual pressure in terms of your actual existence or perceived pressure in the form of a threat to your identity, there tends to be this commonality in how people behave. Like, we don't know why. We're not spending a bunch of time in the laboratory about this. We're not academics. We're business people. But from a place of observation, we see it all around us in business. And because MarketForce is a business tool, what we notice is that the people who habitually respond the same way to these threats tend to have a hard time making a lot of money in life. So success seems to be tied to an ability to not respond to threats to your identity as if it was a threat to your life. That's a big part of this, is to realize that while it might feel like your life is at stake, very rarely in the course of business is it actually like that. And so when we look outward, when we look and observe in nature, what we can learn from animals under pressure is that they have 4 primary survival strategies that they use. They're either, when they have changes in their environment, they either dictate, tolerate, migrate, or hibernate. And people share these same strategies. The primary difference between us and animals is that we have language. So we have language to talk about it. So we usually are able to justify our behavior. But the thing that's common between us and animals is at our core we have this reptilian brain, and when it detects a threat, actual perceived, and it cannot tell the difference, it gets a shot of adrenaline, and all the other highly evolved parts of your brain, the limbic system and your neocortex, get shots of serotonin, which just gets them to relax. And what that really does is it puts your reptilian brain into hyperdrive, and it uses your survival strategy as its navigation system. Now, this is not a thinking response. This is a biological response. And so all we're looking to understand is what's yours. Like, what is your style? What's your biological response? And there's nothing about it that is a real big deal. It's just your characteristics. So it's like the color of your hair. It's the color of your skin. It's the body type you have. It just comes with a package. Now, knowing this allows us to better understand other people, and in particular, like I mentioned before, how they're likely to behave under pressure. And when we can do that without judgment, we can start to really understand how to be more prosperous. And since you all need to coordinate action with these characters that are all running around, it gives you the ability to repackage your strategy for how to work best with them and experience fear breakdown. So before we jump into your homework, in that review, did that generate any questions or any observations you'd like to share, any experience you had with any of those things in the time? Anything else you'd like me to cover? All right. Nothing? All right. So last time we covered the fundamentals of MarketForce styles, and today we're going to look at the interrelationships between styles. In the homework, I want to have some discussion around that. First, I want to talk about any of the famous people that you noticed you were looking at and thought about their style. Renee, can you tell me about your observations about the Dalai Lama?
You know what? I don't have my homework right in front of me, but I think he's one that I felt was similar to me. I feel that I really find that the Dalai Lama thinks always positive things, but probably is always looking to become a better person in life, and so I felt like he was one that I could relate to.
Got it. And then you had Mark Zuckerberg also. You had him done as a control.
Yes. He definitely. I don't remember which one, since I don't have it in front of me. Which one I think it was the influence that I said I had the hardest time with.
That's right.
Yeah. So control back to Mark. He would probably be one that I would like to be like. I think a lot of us would be.
Right.
But I like his style very much.
Huh.
I don't remember what else I put down. Like I said, I was on vacation, so I just did it on my computer and didn't print it out. So.
Oh, good. Was it a good vacation?
It was excellent.
Oh, okay. Great. Glad to hear. Who else? I loved yours, James. I thought you nailed Russell Wilson. You had him as a power.
Yeah, he's a local Seattle quarterback for our local football team. I'm not sure if everybody knows that or not, but whether you know him or not, he's very much structure-oriented. His work ethic is pretty famous around Seattle. As a power, he's always busy, kind of a ricochet rabbit, always working on producing results for the team, very much into the structure of the team. Replication was something they talked about for powers, that sometimes they can confuse that with accomplishment. And as I read about Russell, they'll say he'll run the same play in practice over and over, 10, 15, 20 times till everybody has it perfect. And I was thinking of him as I thought of him, maybe confusing that with accomplishment sometimes, although he does seem to turn it into results when the actual game starts.
He does have a Super Bowl ring.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I don't know if but that was my impressions of him.
Well, it's great, and all we're doing right now is we're just making observations. The whole muscle we're trying to build is the art of observation, and so the question is, who knows what their style is. People in the spotlight have gotten very good at masking their weaknesses and giving you a perspective on them that they really would like you to have. So, we don't really know if it's their style, but I really like your analysis of him, and those are really good clues. And he's not the big showboat. He's not the one who wants all the attention, which would be maybe more of the influence. He's not the Peyton Manning, who essentially needs to control every aspect of how his offense works. He's much more of a team player. I remember an interview with him around Christmas time, and it could have been a Microsoft promotion the way he was talking, but he talked about the gifts that he gave to not just his offensive line, but the entire offense and coaching staff, and they were all Microsoft products. I thought they were pretty funny. So it's probably a promotion, but that's a good power thing to do. Another, James, on your homework, so you identify your style as an authority, is that right?
That's true, although it was my highest score of 6. I had a couple 5s and a 4, so I was bunched up pretty well. I had all the characteristics in my style. It wasn't like a really heavily weighted one way or the other. It seemed like I was kind of, I had some of those across the board on all the styles.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times it does turn out that way. A lot of times that the people's scores are all bunched around 4, 5, and 6, and in those instances, it's going to be harder for you all to detect what that person's primary style is because they're a blend. I mean, we're all a blend, but those of us who score on the indicator more like a 7 or an 8 or a 9. tend to have much more identifiable characteristics of our style, where those who are six and below tend to be a little harder to detect. So that's just an interesting observation. And oftentimes, I've been doing this a long time. People say, well, what's their style? What do you think their style is? And I'll be honest. Sometimes I have no idea, because the whole game is this is how people behave under pressure, and it's only when they're really using their survival strategy does it become really, really evident what their style is. So James, your primary style is authority. You said that the easiest style for you to get along with are other authorities, and that one of the harder styles for you to get along with is power. Is that right?
Yeah. Now that I'm learning this vocabulary, I have a few powers on my team, and they are constantly busy, and their pace is a little bit faster than mine. I tend to want to know, the history, the past. I hate to say analysis paralysis. I know that's a trait of authorities. I like to think I can make decisions a little faster than that, but I am a person who likes to analyze. And if the facts are there, I want to consider them first.
Right.
And powers seem to be a little more fast-paced and maybe without. Sometimes I get frustrated with powers that they move on kind of quickly. Were they the one? No, that was influence. We were saying ready, fire, aim. It wasn't power, but
yeah,
they just seem always busy, and sometimes busy for the sake of being busy. Maybe not so much result-oriented.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's a lot of the interrelationship stuff we're going to cover in the call later today. Thanks, Phil. Appreciate that. That's really great observations. Julie, would it be all right if I called on you?
Sure.
Okay. So your style is power, and the easiest for you to get along with is power. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then you listed hardest to get along with authority. So this is your chance for the rebuttal against James.
Hold on, I'm trying to pull up my homework so I can remember what I sent you. Well, for me, I just like to-do lists, and I'm very structured.
Right.
And so, and I'm a property manager. I'm the director, but I also manage properties. So, on the broker side, I tend to sometimes struggle with the brokers that are authority and always have to be right, and it's their way or no way. Occasionally, I come across that in the office.
Right.
So that's a little frustrating. Most of my managers, they aren't authority, but I find that I have several brokers that are. And I don't like to, mess around, and I like to just get my work done and move to the next thing, because I feel like I'm always so busy. I need to stay on track.
Right.
So I like the structure, and I like to get things done. Right.
Well, you sound like a poster child for powers. That's exactly what we say that is important to powers. So it's really great to hear you say that from a natural expression of what's important to you. And again, the whole game here is for us to just understand each other better. We're not going away. We all need to work together. So when we understand what really is important to each other, that really helps in our ability to repackage. I wanted to spend a little bit of time, Julie, with you on the assessments, because I thought they were worth going through. So one thing she talked about is authorities, especially like in the form of brokers, always having to be right. And then you also talked about Marissa Mayer as your famous person, and you called her out as a control. And then tell me again the hypothesis you had about that.
Well, for me, I kind of struggled with picking two people, so I only ended up picking her. But the reason I said she was control is because she was, in my opinion, thinking about the bottom line. And when she put an end to letting people work from home, there was so much controversy about that, and people were just up in arms. And she just pushed through, and she took the criticism, and she was determined, to try to do what she thought would be a positive change for the company and the bottom line.
Yeah.
Without worrying about, all the backlash.
Right. Well, it's interesting. So in reading that, and then also combining that with your hardest sitting along the authority, it definitely, I think what you're identifying with is people who are more thought-oriented or competence-based rather than the sincerity-based, more action-oriented. Mm-hmm. So, it's easy. Those controls and authorities do get lumped together. Interestingly, I just ask you to consider, and again, nobody's right or wrong in this, is that as you're describing Marissa Mayer, it sounds to me like she's an authority because controls aren't usually brought in to deal with a bottom line. Their controls are about the future and the vision and where we're going, and it takes authorities to do the analysis to understand, what's not working, what do we need to change. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's a little more of a retrospective, and they also, when you said she didn't really care what people thought about her, that's not often. That is an authority characteristic, meaning authorities aren't really focused too much on their identity. They're focused more on doing the right thing, whereas controls, we can characterize them as the needing to be right, that once they have an opinion or a belief about something, it's really hard to change their mind. So I think, I like the way you structure those characteristics. It's just maybe they're a little flopped. Maybe Marissa Mayer is the authority, and maybe the hardest to get along with for you might be control. But let's just play that out as we go through today. Did anybody else, find anything valuable or interesting in the homework? Anybody else want to share a little bit before we jump into the next thing?
Well, actually, this is Kim in Detroit, and I sent my homework this morning, so you probably don't have it
Oh,
yet.
I didn't get it, yeah.
Yeah, I think I sent it to Travis, but
okay.
I'm just curious to see if I'm getting this right. I picked Barack Obama.
Sure.
And
okay.
I said I thought the control, because he's a big picture guy who, wants to fundamentally change things, yet he doesn't seem to be involved in actually making the change. For example, the health care overhaul, he gave it to Congress and said, you do it.
Right.
He's not. He doesn't seem to be involved with the details. Like he'll always say, "I didn't find out about this till Friday or Friday night." And then I picked Paul Ryan, and I said I thought he was an authority because he's a budget guy, and he seems to be detail oriented and very cautious.
Right. Right.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, we don't know whether they are or not, but all we're looking for is this characteristics. And so, yeah, I think you've absolutely nailed the characteristics of what a control and what an authority would do. And that's great.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and that's it. Controls, if you want to engage them, talk to them about the big picture. If you want to lose them, start talking to them about the details. And so it's the exact opposite with authorities. If you want to lose them, start talking about the big picture. And if you really want to engage an authority, it's all in the details. So those are really some of the primary characters that we'd see. So those were awesome. I got to say, Tammy, I don't watch the Shark Tank, but I love how you describe those characters on the Shark Tank, or the hosts on the Shark Tank.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting panel because they all may actually be about the same personality because they have to be pretty dominant to get the job done. That is, to get down or go with them and accept their deal, and But then Mr. Wonderful, he's a sneaky one, so. I'm still having trouble getting on the presentation. Is it okay if I just don't see it this time?
Yeah, it's fine. Like I said, I'll just talk you through it. For whatever reason, I was having a bunch of issues this morning, so great. Yeah, and so that's it, and that's a great distinction there too, Tammy. The idea that there's a difference between personality and market force style. And so I'll say this again. I'm sure reinforcing what Travis has said before is market force is an indication of how you will perform under pressure, and essentially it points to what your survival concern is. Your personality is how you'll handle that concern. So it's why we can have people of the same style that really don't feel the same to you, but they do have the same concern. Does everybody get that?
Yes.
That makes sense. So while people who share your style, you may look like very, very different people, but under pressure, you will connect and have the exact same survival concern, and your survival strategies are aligned. So that's one of the key anchors. That's why oftentimes a lot of organizations use Market Force as a predictor of behavior, but also do personality profiling to really start to get a better understanding of the whole person. So with that, if we're ready to move on to jumping into some of the styles work, we're going to jump in and we're going to do what we call the 50-50s today. So even if you don't have the presentation in front of you, or if you do, I want everybody to draw on a piece of paper. Obviously, James, if you're in transport, you can't do this. Draw the styles map, which is essentially, a target sign with the C at the top, the I at the right for influence, the P at the bottom for power, and the A at the left for authority. And draw 3 of those maps on your paper. And please let me know when you're done. Does everybody have that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so on the first map, draw a diagonal line from the upper left to the bottom right. So you're cutting the styles in half, where you've got controls and influences on one side, and you've got powers and authorities on the other.
Okay.
All right. So what we're looking at here is in the upper right, where next to the controls and the influences, right, either the word creational or offense. And then next to the authorities and powers, right, the words preservation or defense.
What was that last word?
Defense. So we've got, on the upper right, you got creation and offense, and the lower left, you got preservation and defense. And these are essentially looking at, it makes the job of identifying styles easier when you're only trying to identify one or the other, as opposed to all 4. And so what this does is we're going to walk through a series of these on how, we call them 50-50, how you can split 50-50. So essentially we're looking at, in the metaphor of sports, you've got offensive players and defensive players. And so the controls influences are more on the offensive side of the game, and the authorities and powers are more on the defensive side of the game. And so what does that mean? So if we look at offensive players, you all see that there's a screen in front of you now that just has a bunch of pictures of different sports players. And so if you think about the offensive players in sports, the people who are building their identity around offense, what is the responsibility of the offensive sports?
Score points.
That's right. Their whole job is to score points, and in particular to initiate the attack. So just like in sports, in business, there are people who are more building their identity around the offense of the game. Does that make sense? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So then you've got the defensive players. So on the field of play, you've got a bunch of people. The images here are soccer and lacrosse and baseball and basketball and hockey and softball. In defense, what's the job of defense on the field of play?
Stop the other team from scoring.
Yeah, that's right. And so what we'd like to say between the two is that the offensive players are the starters, and the defensive players are the finishers. So the question is, are you more of a starter or a finisher? And so what we find typically is that controls and influences start more projects, generate more leads, start more relationships than they'll ever finish or follow up on. And that's the nature of who they are. That's their identity in the game of business. They're the starters. They create things. And so they're they're happier at the beginning of a project. They're more aligned, they're more excited, they're more contributory. And then as projects go along, they tend to start dropping out. It's the powers and the authorities who are the true finishers on the teams. They play preservation, they play defense. Typically, they won't start anything unless they know they can finish it. So you'll see these people. You're one of these people. You'll see these people all around. And so what happens is controls and influences are better at starting things, but the trailing history sometimes shows they leave a bunch of stuff unfinished. So from a reputation standpoint, what does that create? What do people think about them? What do you think about people like that?
Well, they're typically, big picture folks, which is a good thing, but without, with starting and not finishing, you kind of worry that they're never responsible for the results.
Right. Yeah. So this is the part about being your style, which is noticing that if you're not working with the team and you're not all playing to your strengths, we can just, by the nature of who we are, we'll start creating our own reputational damage. So we also find powers and authorities don't tend to start things until they know they can finish them. They tend to have better processes, better follow-through, better structure, but their trailing history can reveal that they'll hit periods in the lives where they get stagnant. They don't know what to do next. So can anybody relate to that? So it's really understanding how offense and defense work together in order to win the game. So just like in sports, no one's going to win any match if you don't have both offense and defense playing. So let me just ask you all, just to consider. Maybe I'll ask Lauren. Lauren, would you expect, because controls and influences both play on the offense, and then authorities and powers both play on the defense, would you expect that controls and influences get along better, and the authorities and powers get along better because of that?
I would say that powers and authorities would get along better than controls and influences would. Because usually I would think finishing something would be more collaborative, which powers and authorities tend to be, and controls and influence. I mean, personally, I'm an influence, and I feel like I get along the least with controls.
Right.
So I think they would, because they're both on the offense and they're both trying to start something and take the lead, that they'd get along worse.
Right. Great. Well, that's a really good observation. Let's move on to the next map, and we'll layer in one more point of view, and then come back and look at this again in the third map. So on that second map you drew, if you draw a line now diagonally but the other way, so from the, say, lower left to the upper right. Then write the word next to controls and authorities, write the word thought. And next to influence and power, write the word action. Does everybody have that? Here we good? Everybody's on the line, right? I didn't lose anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So we've got controls and authorities are more thought-oriented, and influences and powers are action-oriented. Now, in order to accomplish anything, we need both thought and action. But the question is, which one are you more inclined to focus on? So some people are thought first and action second. Some people are action first and thought second. And so if you think about the action here, the controls and authorities are the ones who think first. They're more competence-based. And then after considering their course of action, then they'll move into action. where influences and powers tend to be more action-oriented, do something, and then figure out later what makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is just a tendency, right? We don't have to do it this way, but this is what we often find. Now, what's interesting about this is when controls and authorities do the thinking before acting, what reputation does that create amongst the influences and powers they work with? What influences and powers think about controls and authorities in this context?
They're slow to act.
Yeah.
Have trouble making decisions.
Right? Yep. Can't we just get along? Come on. Can't we just do this already? Right? So there's a little impatience, a little, and a little judgment about their pace. Now, controls and authorities who are thought-oriented, when they interact with influences and powers who are action first, don't often think through the problem. What do they believe to be true about influences and powers?
Probably that they jump the gun and jump in before all the information is there.
Seems a little reckless. To act before you have all the data and facts.
Yeah. Yeah. And for controls who like things to be in control, it seems really, really out of control. So these are, the next level of relationships. So what happens is you can see that these maps, when they overlay each other, each style gets their own unique combination of thought, action, control, offense, and defense. So let's walk through this. So if we go, how it all comes together. If you take the control, who's offensive-minded, and add in the fact that they think through the problems, right? So they do a lot of thinking about offense. What that essentially leads to is ideas and vision. So the controls on the team have a combination of thinking about the offense and their future focus. They create vision. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So James, this might be a little harder for you to follow, but I'll do my best. So you got your influence who are also offense, but they're action-oriented. So their job is to move the ball forward, right? They think about offense, they think about action, and we say that creates velocity on a team or speed. And then what often happens with influences is they get impatient with everybody else, right? Offense, action. So now if we move down to powers are also action-oriented, but they're defensive in nature. And so what that means is they love to crank stuff out, but they have a resistance to stopping and considering what they're doing. They hate when people make changes, and they really thrive on structure. And so what it creates is a lot of value or volume of activity. They do a lot. So it's defense plus action. Now, finally, if we look at the authorities, they're like controls in that they think a lot, but their thought is defensive-minded, like powers, which means what they often do is they look at other people's work and determine and evaluate and contemplate how to make it better. And so what authorities often stand for in an organization is quality. So we're similar with all of our neighbors, but we also get frustrated because of our differences. So this next map shows all four, which is the control, offense plus thought equals vision, influence is offense plus action equals velocity, power plus defense equals value, and authority is defense plus thought equals quality. And so when you work with other people, each of you is particularly built to deliver one of these four qualities to your team. And all teams need all of these. Everybody needs to have a direction where we're going. We need to move quickly to get there. We need to create a lot of action and then to be able to evaluate how well it's working. And so this is where we start to overlay the importance of having all these different styles on the same team. Any questions or comments on that? Great. Okay, so let's look at this question I asked before, which was, who do you think gets along best? So which So in your third map, you've got your control, influence, power, and authority. And which sets of two do you think would form natural alliances? Who has a guess?
Control authorities and influences and powers.
And what's the thought process there?
Just because of the speed of delivery, so controls and authorities being a little bit more thoughtful and cautious before acting, and then powers and influences getting the idea and wanting to run with it.
Right, right. Now that, and who is this speaking? Sorry.
Sonia.
Sonia, my San Francisco friend. So now take that analysis and then overlay it on top of the other map, which is the offense-defense with the line going the other direction. So what you have is, yes, you'll have controls and authorities are both thought-oriented, but controls are offense, authorities are defense. So they play on different sides of the field. Same between influences and powers. So while in certain circumstances the neighbors tend to do well together, what we find often is that opposites attract. And so the strongest relationships, at least in the beginning, and this is natural alliances. It's not necessarily in the long term, but what we find in both business and life is that in most marriages and relationships, they fall across the axis from each other. And mainly because in those combinations, a control and a power, and an influence and authority, all four of those characteristics are present. You've got thought, action, offense, and defense. And so there's something about humans in knowing how to pair up with each other that realizes that the fact that you can partner with somebody who can show up to be the strength for your shortcoming adds value to your relationship. So let me talk about controls and powers for a moment and why sometimes those work really well. So controls really like to have ideas, but then like to be able to hand them off to other people, right? They like the starting, they like the creational, but they don't really want to do all the follow-up. And powers are a perfect combination because powers love to do work, they love to be busy, and they love to feel in control. And oftentimes powers don't feel in control because they're not sure their work is really all geared and pointed toward anything. So in a really high-level relationship, controls and powers are really natural alliances. Does that make sense? Do you see how that works?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any experience of that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Now, on the opposite side, you've got influences and authorities, and likewise, they've got action, thought, offense, and defense covered. And so influences love to start new relationships. They love to get things started, but then they get bored quickly and migrate on to the next new thing. Now, authorities are the ones who really drive depth. The authorities really make sure that the relationships, the opportunities are maintained and experience real value over time. And for people, if you are an authority, you're probably like this. If you befriend an authority, what you'll notice is that authority will probably be your friend for life. Now, influences make new friends every day. But authorities are really, really careful about the people they friend with, and when they do, that's it. They're committed. Does that anybody experience that? How about Renee? How about your really good friend?
I find that to be very true with my personal life, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas influences make friends really, really quickly, but then they're often on to the next relationship. So Travis is an authority, and his best friend in high school, and actually his wife right now they're both influences. And he always jokingly says that in high school, because he was best friends with an influence, the only reason Travis ever had any fun was because of his influence friend. And the only reason that his friend always stayed out of trouble was because of Travis as an authority. And so we do tend to form good relationships across the actors from each other. Now, what's interesting about these relationships is these we call them neighbor relationships, tend to be more challenging. So anything that's located next to each other on the map tends to have more friction in the beginning. So controls and influences have a tough time with each other, influences and powers have a tough time with each other, powers and authorities, and then controls and authorities have a tough time with each other. However, even though there's a little more friction in the beginning of those relationships, and they take more energy to create, when you learn to work together, they really grow in value over time and have a lot more upside. And the cross-axis relationships, the natural opposites attract, tend to work better in the beginning, but they can slip over time if they're not maintaining the relationship. So, any questions on that? Before we go into some depth, we're going to look at the actual nature of the challenges between each of these relationships.
In the neighbor relationships, does it matter if you're going clockwise or counterclockwise?
Interestingly, great question. Great question. In the neighbor relationships, one person is always going clockwise and the other one is always going counterclockwise. So it's a really good observation, and both of them are at play, which is a little bit of the friction. And so what we're really talking about is two people of those styles being in relationship with each other. So let's look at the controls and influences, and then look at what exactly causes this problem. So influences love to have freedom and run around and try things, don't have to think through it, and that causes controls to lose trust in influences. They actually feel out of control. Primary reason is they're thought-oriented, they're competence-based, they love the idea, they think about the future, and influences live moment to moment. They're constantly creating new things, they're action-oriented, and it causes controls to want to pull their hair out and essentially have an inability to trust them. Now, influence is exact opposite. They're always feeling like control is telling them what to do. Their primary consideration is about freedom. They live in the moment. They don't want to do what other people tell them to do. Controls have that tendency to want to dictate. That is the problem, and that's why it's really hard for influence to be in a relationship with the control, because they always feel like they have no freedom, and their tendency is to want to migrate away. So the upside of that opportunity is that they are both offensive players. And the control just brings more of a strategic bend to the conversation, and influences add velocity. And so when you put them together, they form a great offense. And in fact, much more strategic and much faster than they either could do on their own. Does that make sense? What's interesting is the dynamic is going on at all times. Our survival strategies are kicking in when we feel pressure, and then we aren't actually relating to each other as people. We're relating to each other through our survival strategies. And when we do that, the quality of the relationship gets challenged. So let's look at the relationships between influence and power. So influence looks at power, wants nothing to do with their structure, feels like a loss of freedom. The key points here is influences have a survival concern for freedom, and powers have a survival concern for stability. Those tend to look like the opposite of each other in practical terms, and so powers feel like influence is just too chaotic for their process.
I didn't catch that last point, powers feel. What about the influencers?
That they are just too chaotic for their process.
Okay, chaotic. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So they're both action-oriented, right? Influences and powers are both action-oriented. But the primary difference between them is the creational versus the preservational energy. So influences are always starting new things, and powers want to finish stuff. They both want to move fast, but they're focused on different parts of the equation. So the potential that sits inside of this relationship is that when influences and powers learn to work together, what they realize is the influences are better at getting relationships started, but then they tend to fall off on the follow-through. Well, powers are great on the follow-through. They're just not so good at starting the relationships. So when influence gets a relationship started, the powers can actually really add the value and take that relationship and turn it into a long-term alliance. And so they make the most of those opportunities together. Questions? Comments, or move on? All right, so you've got the downside of authorities and powers working together. Now, they're both defensive-minded, but power is really all about quantity, and authority is all about quality. And so what often happens in work is powers just like to get things done, and they're always afraid that the authorities are going to come around and stop the process. So they'll often, powers can see authorities coming down the hall, and we've actually heard stories about this, where powers will just pretend to be busy and pretend to be on a phone call so they don't have to talk to the authority. Because they feel like they're always slowing down the process, and what it creates is a bit of a cat and mouse game around the office where powers are always avoiding authorities. And so it's hard in this idea of creating a strong defense when you're actually fighting against each other. And does everybody see that conflict between quality and quantity? Both are good. They trigger each other's survival, right? Powers just want to keep working. Authorities want to make sure we're working on the right thing. And that's where they find themselves at odds. Now, the upside between these two is really forming a strong defense in which powers actually will accept prioritization. Editing, review, let the authorities provide some options of what the best thing to work on is, and then let the powers crank away. And so between the two of those, if they can learn how to work together, they form a great defense.
Tony, I have a question. This is Renee in Las Vegas.
Yeah, Renee.
My observation with my assessment and what I'm listening as you're talking, I'm finding that in everyday life I can pretty much get along with anyone, no matter what happens.
Yep.
Even if the whole apple cart is turned totally upside down, I can pretty much get along with anyone. And I find that my assessment, I'm an 8 on the power and authority. So with what you're saying is that powers can get along best with controls, and then authorities can get along best with influence. So does that answer what I'm thinking, that I basically can get along with anyone?
Right.
I'm wondering how that all works out.
Well, it's all really good observations. So, yes, we can get along with anybody. This is not a measure of personality, right? So just because somebody is a style doesn't mean they're a nice person. You could be a nice style, you could be a mean person. It's not relative to your style. So I'm sure you just get along with people. I think even Sonia had mentioned, that one of the things that was, her distinction around who's it hard to get along with is people who don't have quality of character. And I think that is the right observation, which is we have the ability to get along with everybody. But in the moment when we're working together, and this is the key about this, Renee, when your survival gets triggered, when your biology gets triggered, it's really at that point when we start to rub each other the wrong way. And we start fighting for different things. And what we're really fighting for is our own identity. So, yes, the whole point of this is to be able to get along better with everybody. Oftentimes what we find is people who have high styles with each other, they tend to be their own the internal conflict is the biggest conflict. My own control fighting with my own influence. So let's wrap this up and let's do the authority and the control and where they intersect with each other. again, they're both on the thought side of the fence. They both play the competence game, so you'd think, well, they have a lot in common. They should get along well, except for the distinction of their time frame. So control people are always looking to the future, 5 years out. That's what makes sense to them. Whereas authorities only really think backward in order to make sense of things. So they analyze. You can't analyze data that hasn't happened yet. So they're history-focused. And so it's really the conflict between these two. We like to say that the biggest problem between a control and authority is they're standing back to back trying to see eye to eye. And they won't ever do that because of the fact that they're looking in different directions to make sense of things. So control is certain, because their whole thing is about knowing what the path is. They're certain to write about the future because they feel like they can influence. They feel like they can change the future. Where authorities are confident they can prove the control wrong because they've got evidence from the past to show that the future won't work. And it's an unresolvable conversation. It's an unresolvable conflict. And the only thing that's getting in the way is the time frame that's driving their point of view. Now, the upside potential between these is the authorities can actually do some, so controls often are a little impetuous. They do start making declarations about the future without any evidence. And so authorities can really do some of the analysis that they do very well and provide objects of control, and then allows the control to really move forward with some of the grounding from the past, which makes them really strategic in their movements. So any questions on that? Comments? Experience in dynamics? Okay, again, the point of all this is so that we just have more empathy for each other, so we can understand each other better and figure out how to make each other right by leveraging what each other does best. So I want to walk through a couple of principles here, and I ask that you just write this down. We'll talk about them. There's two principles. The first one says, the biggest barrier to your prosperity is your inability to move clockwise. The biggest barrier to your prosperity is your inability to move clockwise. Now, these two are not 100% accurate, but they're accurate about 75% of the time. So on this map, on the market force map, when you move in the clockwise direction, if we're going to use some judgmental language here, clockwise is good, counterclockwise is bad. Meaning clockwise creates more prosperity, counterclockwise creates more poverty. Now, biology under pressure tends to make us want to go counterclockwise, which is the bad direction. So we each struggle with what the next style does naturally. Let me crank through these. I'll get these up here for a second. Okay. So controls are really good at coming up with ideas, but they struggle with what influences do naturally. Influences naturally do relationship and sales really well. So when controls struggle to generate support for their ideas, what they'll tend to do is go back and act like authorities, which is to say they go and get evidence for their ideas, and then they cram those ideas down other people's throats. So this is a dictator strategy, and this survival strategy that people run, and the consequence of running your survival strategy is it tends to hurt your reputation. So each person, when they go backwards, it hurts their reputation. So a lot of people think controls are really smart, but they're impossible to work with. Which is why oftentimes when we ask the question, what is it which is the style that's hardest to get along, controls often top the list. And I'm a control, so I take that very personally. Just kidding. I don't take anything personally. I'm a control. Okay, so influences always tend to struggle, where powers have the greatest strength. So influences are good at getting people fired up about ideas, but they struggle with the structure and the follow-through because those things feel like a loss of freedom for them. So when they start to feel that loss of freedom, they'll go backward and act like a control. They'll come up with a new idea to get new things started. So influence at an extreme, do this enough times, they'll eventually leave their job, move to a new town, change their name, start over completely, which is the ultimate migration strategy. So therefore, the negative reputation influences can produce is that people think they're really nice, but they're really, really flaky and can't be counted on. The powers are good at getting things done. They're the grinders. They're preservational. Powers, you can imagine powers having a bumper sticker on the car that says, "I'd rather be working." But the thing is, when you ask them to take time out and review and reflect, determine if the work that they're doing is of any value, they'll resist. They don't like to change. They don't like to stop. They don't like to get in the way, right? You have a to-do list. You just want to complete it. So what powers are going to do is they're going to resist and tend to just want to work harder. And when they go backward, they're going to find an obstacle. They're going to go back to their team, start selling everybody on making a big push to power our way through this. So it's interesting. Powers will use that term a lot. We just need to power our way through this, which is the ultimate tolerate strategy. Now, given that powers run tolerate strategies, and they're really big on the community and the collective, they're really reluctant to ever fire anybody. So what happens over time is they can tend to amass large teams that aren't very efficient, and they tend to be seen as pushovers. Now, authorities really love analytics and reviewing and reflecting, but have a problem making decisions. So they review the information, but they don't quite know what to do with it. So instead of declaring the future, what they tend to move is move backwards, act like a power, busy themselves with more work simply to avoid making decisions, which is the ultimate hibernation strategy. So that makes a lot of people think that authorities are really, really smart, but they're just too slow and never get anything done. Does that make sense? Oftentimes, we're our own worst enemies, and when we're biologically triggered, we're going to tend to move counterclockwise on the map. Now, this intuition is good. It would likely save your life if you're in a life and death situation, but it tends to hurt your business reputation because business is not a survival game. So let's take this to the second principle, and you can write this one down too, is that each style, the style counterclockwise is typically your second most comfortable style. So again, your counterclockwise style is typically the style that's most comfortable to you. And so if we take those two principles together, one, we each struggle to move forward and we have a natural tendency to move backwards, we can see how we're biologically built to move backwards and to move counterclockwise. This is the game. This is the thing to overcome. So this is what we call getting wired for prosperity. It's overcoming your natural wiring, your natural biological response to stay in poverty. Does that make sense? This is what we'll keep working on. So we're about to wrap up here. Let's just walk through a couple of a quick little things just so that you can have an idea, start to play around with this. So we talked about all these different relationships, but what happens when you get together with your style? So the question, we're going to walk through each of these. When a control gets together with the control, the two questions I have is, I'd like everybody to just venture a guess. Do they get along, and do they get anything done? So you get two controls together. Do they get along? What do you think?
No, I don't think so.
No, they tend to not get along. Do they tend to, well, because they fight for ideas, right? Do they ever get any work done?
No.
No, they tend to fight about ideas, and that's how they spend all their time. So do you get two influences together, do they get any work done?
Probably none.
No. But did they get along?
Yeah.
They have a great time
together and come up with all these great ideas.
Yeah, exactly. They have a blast. Influences love hanging out with other influences. What about powers? You get two powers together. Do they like each other?
My first thought is yes, because they're going to get together and just work their butts off. And
That's right. That's right. They're the only ones that get anything work. That's correct. Do you get two authorities together? Do they like each other?
Probably.
I'd have to make a decision. I don't know. I'm an authority. It's kind of hard to know. Did they get anything done?
Probably not.
And have meetings about meetings to talk about meetings and what they might do because they don't want to make decisions. So, you know, what I love about this slide is that it really points to the fact that the only people who ever really get anything done in business are the powers. I love the powers. So let's do a quick review here. Last meeting was all about fundamentals. Today was about the interrelationships between styles. Let's do a quick pop quiz. So everybody's familiar with the classic glass half full, half empty scenario. So let's say you've got four styles sitting around a table. In the middle of the table is a glass that is 50% full of liquid. If you ask each one, what do they see? If you asked an authority, what would they say?
Half empty.
Half empty.
The tendency would be say half empty, but that would be assuming that authorities are going to answer the question at all. And typically what they'll ask you is, why do you want to know? You get a control at the table, and the control looks at that glass, and what does the control see?
Whatever they want to see.
Yeah, exactly. What they see is, can somebody please fill up my glass? My glass is half empty. What's going on here? You know, and then you've got the power people who are always willing to do the work, so they're going to make the offer that I'm happy to fill that glass up for you. And the influences when they see that glass, what are they going to see? Well, they're going to want to know, does this come with a hamburger? Where's the rest of the meal? Right? So they're always a little bit offbeat, off beaten path. They do it a little differently than everybody else. So last one here, let's say, and this is the idea, we're all on a bus. We're traveling through, outside some scenic environment. We all think we're looking at the same thing. But if we realize we're on a bus, we're all looking out the window, what does each see? So the control will look out and see the horizon, see the view, see where we're going, always holding the big picture. The power person is looking not necessarily outside the bus, but inside the bus. Is everybody on the bus and looking at the map? Are we on the right place? Are we making the right progress? What do influences see when they are on a bus for a long ride?
We're hanging out with everybody on the bus.
Well, that's if it's a party bus, but usually what influences say is it feels like a jail cell. I got to get off this thing, right? Because if your strategy is a migrate strategy and you're feeling trapped, it just triggers your survival. So the authorities, this is the best one. The authorities, when they look out the window, what do they notice?
They're probably looking in the rearview mirror.
Yeah. The other ones are going, you remember they're all about quality. When's the last time these windows were washed? So the point of all this is that we're all watching different movies. We're all looking through the world through a different point of view. And what we're really trying to do is just to have you be more successful in life by moving in the clockwise direction. That's the whole game we're playing. So this is nearing the end of phase 1. And the next thing for you to consider, if you got value out of this, you want to continue your learning, is the phase 2 training. Phase 1 is focused really on the coordination of action. So of the things that are showing up on this page, there's 4 things: compass setting, more powerful relationships, more effective coordination of action, and overcoming adversity quicker. Phase 1 is really the relationships, coordination of action, and overcoming adversity. The compass setting is really what phase 2 is all about, and that's the identity management game. And it's really about moving forward with the learnings here, understanding your style, and then how do you really build an identity around that. So just want to let you know there's a course coming up. I believe it starts on April 15th. It's the same time as day as these sessions have been, so it's 9 to 10:15. Primary difference is it's 4 weeks, not 6. And they're going to be smaller groups, smaller classes, because it's more focused attention. It's about identity. Management. So if anybody's interested in that, you can just go to Colleges University and sign up directly. I believe Renee has already signed up for that.
Yes, I am.
So highly recommend it. It's great. In the game of identity, it's really the best practice to help you win. So now that we're done, about to wrap this up, I just want to let everybody know that the homework's going to be on the way. Travis is going to send out the homework. He'll probably connect with you to see if I completely mess this up or not. And then Travis will return and we'll complete with you the final meeting of Phase 1. Next week, you will be with him. And my parting comment to you is to go practice what you've learned and go create more prosperity in your lives.
Thank
you very much.
Thanks, Tony.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm happy to stay on the line if anybody wants any further discussion. Otherwise, have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.